The instant I informed my husband about being dismissed, he showed no reaction whatsoever. No worry, no surprise, just raw seething fury. "Naturally you were let go," he barked, forcefully closing his laptop. "You've consistently behaved like you're superior to everyone else. Perhaps now you'll finally understand something." I remained there motionless, still wearing my work attire, gripping my purse straps as though they were my only anchors. I had practiced this conversation in my mind countless times, envisioning how he would embrace me warmly, assure me we'd navigate this challenge together. But this wasn't that scenario. This wasn't that person. The reality was, I hadn't been terminated. I had received a promotion. Suddenly, wonderfully, following years of silent, unrecognized dedication. However, as I made my way home that day, considering how Brian had become increasingly remote, increasingly preoccupied, something within me wavered. What if his response wasn't positive? What if he harbored resentment about my advancement, about my earning more than he did? He had grown up in a family where the man served as the breadwinner, the foundation builder, as his mother frequently proclaimed. I'd listened to those words countless times, her voice resonating through our home like some antiquated doctrine. Nevertheless, I hadn't anticipated his explosive reaction. I recall how he regarded me as if I were some burden, some deadweight he hadn't realized he'd been dragging along. "Do you comprehend the situation you've created for me? How exactly do you imagine we'll manage the expenses now?" he continued shouting, striding back and forth across the room, never once inquiring about my feelings or what had actually occurred. I remained silent. Not because I lacked the desire to stand up for myself, but because I literally couldn't find my voice. My throat had constricted as if my body instinctively understood I needed to remain quiet. And perhaps that was fortunate, because if I had revealed the truth at that moment, that I'd been promoted, that I would earn more than ever, I would have overlooked what followed. I would have missed the fractures beneath the facade that were finally becoming visible. Instead, I simply stood there while he continued his tirade, explaining how I'd never contributed anything meaningful, how all I accomplished was moving documents around while he constructed tangible things that actually mattered. I can barely recall how the remainder of that night unfolded. I believe I retreated to the bathroom and remained under the shower for 30 minutes, allowing the water to burn my skin as if it could cleanse away the shame, the bewilderment, the terror. That evening, he slept on the sofa without speaking. I lay in our bed, gazing at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. There had been indicators, I realized, signs I had dismissed for far too long. The extended evenings at the office, the furtive glances at his device, the way he ceased making eye contact during our conversations. And now this, his complete absence of compassion, his frigidity. It wasn't merely about the deception anymore. Something else was occurring. Something more sinister. And I was beginning to sense it building within me. The survival instinct, the need to discover the truth before it consumed me first. Reflecting on it now, the warning signs had existed long before I ever mentioned being terminated. They weren't obvious red banners, not initially, just minor details. The way Brian began returning home progressively later, always with some vague justification. The way his phone, once carelessly placed on the kitchen surface, was now perpetually face down, securely locked, or how he'd begun avoiding our Saturday morning meals, something we'd maintained religiously for years, with nothing more than a casual shrug and it's perhaps another time. I convinced myself it was simply pressure. His construction company had secured a major downtown contract, and he was working longer hours than usual. I wanted to accept that explanation. I genuinely did, because the alternative, the growing suspicion that the man I'd shared a life with for 10 years might be drifting away, was too agonizing to confront. But the incident that embedded itself in my memory, the one I kept replaying repeatedly in my mind, occurred 2 months before I tested him. I had finished work early one Friday. My team had completed a product launch ahead of deadline, and I thought it would be lovely to surprise Brian, prepare his preferred meal, uncork a bottle of wine, restore a fragment of us that I'd been missing recently. I entered the house quietly, expecting to find him working in the living area. But as soon as I opened the front entrance, I heard his voice emanating from the hallway. He was speaking on the phone using a tone I'd never heard before. Serious, sharp, almost rehearsed. "No, she hasn't figured out anything yet," he said, followed by an extended pause. "We simply need additional time." Then he laughed. Not the warm, affectionate laugh I once knew. This was different. Cold, disconnected, almost merciless. I stood paralyzed in the corridor, clutching the doorframe, my pulse thundering in my ears. He was discussing me. I was certain of it. I couldn't hear the other person's response. Perhaps it was on speaker. Perhaps not. But I could feel the gravity of the conversation settling on my chest like a boulder. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then, as if nothing had transpired, he emerged from the bedroom, noticed me, and smiled. Kissed my cheek as though it were any regular day. I smiled in return, went to the kitchen, began boiling pasta, but something within me fractured that night. A silent break, invisible externally, but spreading rapidly beneath the surface. From that day forward, I began observing him differently, listening more intently, noticing the subtle changes in his conduct. The way he avoided discussing the future, the way he grew irritated when I asked about his day, the small falsehoods he told without even realizing I detected them. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't being suspicious. My intuition was warning me, and I was finally paying attention. It was a peculiar form of mourning, grieving the gradual demise of something while still pretending it remained alive. I kept telling myself to wait, to gather more evidence, to be certain, until that moment in the hallway following my fabricated dismissal, when the last of my delusions finally crumbled. That's when I understood something larger was unfolding. Something I hadn't even begun to comprehend. But I was about to discover it. And once I did, there would be no return. It was approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon when I heard the front door opening. I had remained home from work that day, claiming illness. Honestly, I simply needed space to process everything. Brian believed I was still jobless, shattered, vulnerable, afraid to confront the world. He had no knowledge that I was still employed. No awareness that I'd just received a promotion. No idea that I was using this time to gather myself together. Quietly, carefully. I froze when I heard not one, but two voices entering the house. The second voice didn't belong to a colleague or friend. It belonged to Linda, my mother-in-law. I moved silently into the hallway, positioning myself just beyond the crack of the guest room door. I knew I shouldn't eavesdrop, but something about their casual conversation in the middle of a weekday made my skin crawl. "So," Linda's voice rang sharp and familiar. "Why the unexpected midday visit?" "Everything satisfactory. It's all proceeding exactly as planned," Brian responded, sounding almost satisfied. "She informed me she was dismissed yesterday. Completely crushed. Just as you anticipated." I covered my mouth with my hand, forcing myself not to gasp. "Finally," Linda said, exhaling with contentment. "She won't have any option now. She'll have to accept our conditions." My knees weakened slightly. I leaned against the wall, heart pounding so violently I could barely hear what came next. "She's entirely dependent on me now," Brian continued. "Selling the house is simply a matter of time." Linda released a satisfied little laugh. "See, I told you that girl was never suitable for you. Too driven, too self-reliant. You honestly believe she'd be with you if it weren't for your father's house." It felt like receiving a blow to the chest. That house had been our residence for a decade. I'd invested so much of myself into it. My time, my money, my heart. And now they were scheming to sell it as if I were merely some renter they had finally manipulated into departing. "Don't begin, Mom," Brian said with a sigh. "We already discussed this." "And what about Claire?" Linda asked. "When will you inform her it's time?" Claire. The name struck me like freezing water down my spine. Claire Jennings. I knew who she was vaguely. Mark's girlfriend before the accident. Mark, Brian's elder brother, who died in a car collision 3 years ago. Claire had vanished after the funeral. I had no idea Brian had maintained contact, let alone. She's prepared, Brian said, his voice suddenly softer. The baby's thriving. Claire says he's developing quickly. Already resembles Mark. My stomach churned violently. I'll adopt him once the divorce is finalized, Brian continued, almost as if he were discussing a business transaction. He'll be my son. Our son. I couldn't breathe. Perfect, Linda purred. Just imagine how delighted Claire will be when she learns the house is going on the market. She's waited so long for this. My ears were buzzing. My vision became hazy. This wasn't merely betrayal. This was orchestrated replacement. They weren't simply planning to abandon me. They were planning to eliminate me. And the most painful part was I had no idea how long this had been developing. No clue how many smiles, how many kisses had been lies, rehearsed, strategic, calculated. My husband wasn't just being unfaithful. He was conspiring. I always knew Claire was the right one for you, Linda said, her voice melting into that sickeningly sweet tone she reserved for people she genuinely liked. You two are ideal together. It's just unfortunate you met her too late, after you married that one. That one. That's how she referred to me. Not Rachel, not your wife, just that one. A substitute. An impediment. I bit down on my knuckle to prevent making a sound. My entire body was trembling, but I couldn't stop listening. I had to listen to everything. Let's not become overzealous, Brian murmured. We still need to ensure Rachel doesn't resist us regarding the divorce. She won't, Linda responded with confidence. Not if you approach it correctly. Remind her she has nowhere else to turn. No employment. No financial reserves. She'll surrender. I clenched my fists, every nerve in my body screaming. They assumed I was helpless, that I was cornered. But I wasn't. Not yet. Not completely. And what if she doesn't surrender? Linda inquired. What if she hires legal representation? Brian's voice became quiet and controlled. Too controlled. Then we strike her with the adultery accusation. I nearly lost my balance. What adultery? Linda asked. It doesn't matter, Brian said. I have some old photographs from that conference she attended 2 years back. Just her with some co-workers, but they can be misinterpreted appropriately. Sufficient to create suspicion. You're a smart boy, Linda said. Just like your father. But he wasn't finished. If that fails, Brian continued, we charge her with disclosing confidential documents. She handled sensitive client records. She brought materials home constantly. I'll claim I discovered her attempting to sell information to rivals. I felt my knees buckle and I descended slowly to the floor. My hands were freezing. My husband, the man who once supported my hair while I was sick from food poisoning, who painted our bedroom walls while I selected the shade, was scheming to demolish my existence from within. He was going to perjure himself in court. He was going to accuse me of actions I never committed just to remove me for Claire and an infant who wasn't even his. Claire, the reserved, gentle woman I recalled only in fragments from Mark's funeral. She had appeared compassionate, delicate. I never envisioned she would return to our lives like this. Not as the woman taking my place. Not as the mother of the child my husband intended to claim as his own. How's the baby progressing? Brian asked then, his voice suddenly bright. Almost joyful. Healthy, Linda replied with pride. Claire mentions he's developing rapidly. Resembles Mark exactly. Same eyes, same chuckle. You'll witness it soon enough. The room began revolving. They were constructing a new family. Brian, Claire, the infant, and Linda, naturally, always Linda. The ideal little group. And in their perspective, I was already absent. Just documentation. Just one final discussion. I'll inform her tonight, Brian said. She's already anxious after losing her position. It's the ideal moment. I'll adopt the understanding approach. Suggest it's better for both of us. Provide her some money to depart. Linda scoffed. Emphasize the sympathy. Make her feel like a liability. She'll collapse. Women like her always do. I bit my lips so forcefully I tasted blood. But even through the agony, I smiled to myself, just barely, because they didn't know the reality. I hadn't been terminated. I had been promoted. And they had no awareness that their scheme was already crumbling. I remained hunched behind the door long after they ceased speaking. I didn't move when I heard the sofa creak or the front door shut behind Linda. I just sat there embracing my knees, heart pounding so loudly I thought it would expose me. My body was paralyzed, but my mind was blazing. This wasn't merely betrayal. This was warfare. And I'd walked directly into it, defenseless, oblivious until now. But I wasn't going to be a victim. Not silently. Not ever. That evening, I didn't speak to Brian. He behaved as if nothing had occurred. He poured himself a beverage, watched the match, glanced at me with that deliberately neutral expression that now seemed so repulsive. I didn't look at him. I didn't trust myself to, because if I did, I might shatter the facade, and I needed that facade, at least for a while longer. In bed, I lay motionless with my eyes open, my back to him. He fell asleep quickly, like always, as if the day hadn't included scheming to eliminate me from his existence. I listened to his breathing and strategized. The following morning, I departed the house before dawn. I didn't go to work. Not immediately. I went to the storage area where we kept old papers, warranties, receipts, contracts, tax documents. I retrieved everything I could locate. I needed evidence, proof that I had contributed to that house, that I had invested in it with my own funds, not just my presence. The new water heater. My bonus paid for it. The custom cabinetry in the kitchen. My design, my deposit. I extracted bank statements, delivery invoices, furniture receipts. I packed them all into a box, then into a bag, and drove across town to the only person I trusted, Emily. Emily Barnes wasn't just a coworker. She was my friend. 4 years, we'd been each other's anchor during late nights at the office. She knew my coffee preference, my birthday, the name of the stray cat I once attempted to adopt and failed miserably. Most importantly, she'd never once deceived me, not even with rumors, and that made her precious now. When I appeared at her door, she didn't ask questions. She just observed me for a moment, then stepped aside. "I need a favor," I whispered. "Say no more," she said. In her kitchen, I placed the documents on her table. "If anything occurs, if I vanish, if I stop responding to calls, give this to my attorney." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I'm not being paranoid," I added, seeing the worry in her expression. "But I can't take any chances." Emily nodded slowly. "You're frightening me a little, but okay, whatever you require." I exhaled, the tension in my chest easing just slightly. I hadn't told her everything. Not about Claire, not about the baby, not yet. But she understood enough, that something was seriously wrong, that I needed her, and for now that was sufficient. As I drove back home, I passed by the park where Brian and I used to stroll on Sundays. I remembered how he used to hold my hand, how he once looked at me like I was his entire universe. That man, that version of him, was dead. The one waiting at home for me now. He was a stranger in familiar flesh. And tonight, that stranger was going to sit me down, look me in the eye, and ask me to vanish. He had no idea that I was already planning how to ensure it would be him who lost everything. When I walked through the front door that evening, I knew it was approaching. The conversation, the performance, he'd rehearsed it in his mind. I could see it on his face, that forced concern, the artificial weight in his shoulders. Brian Carter was about to pretend to be the hero in his own betrayal. "Hey," he said, voice low, cautious. "We should talk." I gave him a weary smile, just enough to appear worn down, just enough to keep him confident. "Sure," I replied, dropping my bag by the door. What's happening? He gestured to the living room, already arranged like a scene from a play. He dimmed the lights. 2 glasses of wine sat on the coffee table. He even had a blanket draped over the armrest, like this was going to be some gentle mutual discussion, like he was doing me a favor by dismantling my life tenderly. I sat. He took the armchair across from me, intertwining his fingers, releasing a sigh so dramatic I nearly laughed. Rachel, he began, I've been contemplating a lot recently about us, about where we stand, and I believe we've drifted apart. I kept my eyes on the wine glass, nodding slightly. Okay. I don't want this to be messy, he continued, leaning forward. I don't want attorneys or courtrooms. I just think it's time we both acknowledged this marriage isn't functioning anymore. He sounded devastated, like he was the victim, like this decision was tearing him apart inside. I mean, with you being unemployed now, he added gently, maybe this is a good opportunity for a fresh beginning for both of us. My stomach churned. I let my bottom lip quiver just slightly. Are you suggesting divorce? He nodded, reaching for his wine like he deserved to take a triumphant sip. Yes, but amicable, civilized. I don't want to battle. I'm willing to help you get back on your feet. You'll need a place to live, obviously, and some money to get established. I tilted my head, just enough to seem fragile. You'd do that for me? Of course, he said, placing a hand on his chest like some kind of savior. I care about you, Rachel. I don't think we're compatible anymore. We've both changed. He paused for effect, then added, and the house, it's legally mine. It was inherited from my father, but I want to be fair. I'll offer you a settlement, something to help with rent for a few months. I blinked, let out a shaky breath. How much? He named a figure. It was ridiculous. A fraction of what I'd invested into that home. But I didn't laugh. I didn't even react. Instead, I stared at him like I was seeing him for the first time. I thought we'd try harder, I whispered. I thought we were stronger than this. Brian reached out, touched my hand like a man playing a role he no longer cared about. I'm sorry, but this is the best path forward, I promise. And right then, I gave him what he wanted. I nodded slowly, eyes misty, lips pressed tight in defeat. Okay, I said. I'll consider it. He exhaled visibly, relieved. But behind my silence, behind the trembling breath and the wet lashes, I was already building my case, because he didn't want lawyers. But I was going to bring the best one in town. The next morning, I left the house before Brian even stirred. He was still snoring on the couch, buried beneath a blanket like a child hiding from consequences. I didn't leave a note this time. No explanation, no polite goodbye. Just silence. Let him wonder. Downtown Portland was just awakening when I stepped into the old brick building where Monica Bell's office was nestled between a florist and a tax accountant. The hallway smelled faintly of lavender and ink. I sat in the waiting room for 10 minutes that felt like an eternity, rehearsing what to say. But when Monica opened the door and called my name, I stood up, walked in, and told her everything. Not everything exactly. I left out Claire, the baby, the betrayal so deep it made my voice crack. But I provided her sufficient information, enough for an attorney to perceive the shape of the conflict ahead, the inherited property, the years of shared costs, the receipts and bank records, the way he desired a divorce, swift and silent, with an amount so minimal it was offensive. Monica listened without criticism. Her expression was composed, methodical, her pen moving across yellow legal paper like it had been prepared for battle. You've been married 10 years, she asked, her tone exact. 12, I corrected. 10 legally, 2 before that. She nodded, made a notation. Any children? No. Evidence of financial contributions to the residence? I have receipts, invoices, bank records, everything. Furniture, renovations, fixtures. She leaned back, clasped her hands. Rachel, you have a case, a solid one. But I need you to comprehend something. If we proceed with this, there's no reversing course. It won't be pleasant. He's going to fight viciously. I looked her directly in the eye. He already is. Her expression didn't alter, but something behind her eyes changed. Respect, perhaps, or acknowledgement. Then let's get to work. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. Cooler. Lighter. I still had a mountain to climb, but for the first time in days, the burden on my chest had lifted. I wasn't floundering in the darkness anymore. I had someone in my corner, someone who saw the pieces clearly and knew how to utilize them. I went directly to the office after that. No more concealing. I walked through the doors with my head elevated, greeted my team, sat down at my desk, and opened the department dashboard like nothing had occurred. Brian believed I was jobless, lost, vulnerable, but I was back completely. My phone vibrated around lunch. A text from him. Hope your interviews went well. Let me know when you're ready to discuss more about next steps. Next steps. I almost chuckled. He had no idea I'd already taken them. I responded with a simple, "We'll see." That afternoon, I met with my team, reviewed quarterly objectives, scheduled one-on-ones, and approved a new client project. I was efficient, focused, unshakable, and when I finally walked out of the building at sunset, I knew something had shifted permanently inside me. I wasn't the same woman who wept in the hallway, who trembled in silence while her husband planned her elimination. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone else, someone stronger, sharper, prepared. He wanted me to disappear quietly. But now I was preparing to reclaim everything on my terms. Brian was waiting for me when I arrived home. He was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, attempting to appear composed. But the twitch in his jaw, the slight shift in his weight, those revealed the real story. He was anxious. "Hey," he said casually, like we were roommates discussing groceries. "You got a minute?" I hung my coat slowly, then turned to face him. "Sure." He gestured toward the living room. We sat opposite each other again, that same arrangement from before. The couch, the wine, the practiced gravity. He hadn't changed the scene. He thought the first performance had worked, that I had accepted his script. "I've been thinking," he began. "I want to finalize things soon. The divorce, the paperwork, get everything settled so we can both move forward." I nodded, keeping my expression gentle. "Okay." He blinked. "So you agree?" "I'm not fighting the divorce," I said softly. "But I do want to understand what's fair. So I've spoken with someone." He froze. "Someone? A lawyer?" His eyes narrowed. "Why would you need a lawyer? I'm offering a generous settlement. We can handle this ourselves." I tilted my head. "You said the house was legally yours, right?" "It is," he said quickly. "But we've both lived there for over a decade. I've invested money. I have receipts. I just want to make sure it's fair." He laughed, sharp and defensive. "Rachel, come on. You're blowing this out of proportion. You lived here. That's not the same as owning it." "I paid for the kitchen remodel," I said quietly. "The bathroom tiles, the appliances, all from my accounts. I just want that acknowledged." Brian stood up, pacing now. "I don't want this to get ugly. Then don't insult me with a figure that barely covers 3 months of rent." He turned toward me, and for the first time, the mask slipped. I saw it, the flash of anger, of panic. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being intelligent. You taught me that, remember? Plan ahead. Protect your assets." He ran a hand through his hair, eyes darting. "You really want to do this? Get lawyers involved? You think that's a good idea?" "I think it's necessary," I replied. "You said you wanted things to be fair. This is how fairness works." He didn't answer immediately. He just stared at me as if trying to recalculate, reframe me in his mind. I was no longer the fragile wife he thought he'd broken. I was something else now, a problem. So what are you going to ask for? Half the house. I don't want half, I said. Just what I put in. And maybe a little more for the time you wasted lying to me. His jaw clenched. He didn't deny it. He didn't even react. And in that silence, I knew he was finally afraid. He thought I would break. He didn't expect me to sharpen. The divorce concluded 6 weeks later. Not quietly, not quickly. Brian dragged his feet once he realized I wasn't going to play dead. His lawyer, probably the same arrogant friend he bragged about to his mother, tried every trick in the book. But Monica was sharper, smarter, ruthless when she needed to be. She had a copy of every receipt, every transfer, every signature I'd ever made on that house. We didn't pursue more than what was fair, but we made sure Brian couldn't keep what wasn't his. In the end, I walked away with a respectable settlement and full legal recognition of my contributions. Not just financially, but as a partner who had invested years of her life into a shared home, into building something real before he decided to burn it down. The last time I saw him, we were signing papers in a sterile conference room downtown. Claire wasn't there, but I could feel her ghost behind his shoulder. Quiet, passive, waiting to move in the moment I was gone. Brian didn't meet my eyes. Not once. When it was over, I stood, tucked the pen into my bag and said, "You always underestimated me." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I saw it in his face, regret, or maybe just disbelief that the story he had written for me didn't end the way he planned. I moved into a small apartment overlooking the river. Not fancy, not large, but it was mine. The first night I slept there, I kept every light on, not out of fear, but because I could. No one to tell me I was being dramatic. No one to call me a burden. Just silence. Peaceful, earned. Word got around that Claire and Brian were having adjustment issues. Apparently, things weren't as idyllic as they'd imagined. Raising a child wasn't as simple as smiling for photos and pretending love could be transplanted. Linda tried to help, of course. She always did, like micromanaging other people's lives. But I heard through Emily that the tension was building, that money was tighter than expected, that Claire hadn't quite fit in the way Linda had hoped. None of it surprised me, because their life was built on lies, and lies don't hold foundations for long. I don't spend my days checking in on them. I don't stalk social media or linger in bitterness. I've rebuilt from the ground up in my own way, slowly, deliberately. My job is steady. My name is respected. I eat alone some nights, but I've learned that solitude is not the same as loneliness. Sometimes it's healing. I've taken up boxing classes on Saturdays. I've gone back to reading poetry. I call my sister more often. I've even started writing again, something I hadn't done since college. There are pieces of me I thought were lost, but they were just buried under years of being small, of making room for someone else's ego. And now I take up all the space I need. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Being underestimated is the most dangerous gift life can hand you. Because when you rise, when you fight back, no one sees it coming. Brian thought I would crumble. Instead, I became unshakable.